It was well after midnight, but Brian couldn't sleep. He was reading in bed when his 5-year-old son suddenly entered the bedroom. After standing at the door for a while, the boy quietly said that he could no longer tolerate a woman in his bedroom who climbed into bed with him and stroked his hair. "What woman? There's no one here but us." Brian tried to calm the boy down. In response, OT looked up at him with lifeless eyes and said in a squeaky old woman's voice, "Thursday is the time to pay the rent," and lost consciousness. The father immediately called a doctor. But the doctors did not find anything disturbing in the boy's condition. Meanwhile, similar episodes began to be repeated every week. Finally, 5 months later, on another sleepless night, Brian decided to go up to his son's bedroom. Opening the door, he suddenly saw an ugly old woman slip out of the boy's bed and jump out the window. Looking out into the street, Brian saw no one. A mother of 3 children tells how one evening, at 10 o'clock, she was reading in the living room when her 2 daughters, 6 and 9 years old, ran into her. "Where is he?" they asked cheerfully. The startled mother informed them that there was no one in the house, and they themselves should already be in bed. The girls, looking at their mother with disbelief, said that they had just been playing with a boy in their room, and he had just run into their mother's room before their eyes. It took Tina at least a quarter of an hour to convince them that there was no boy. A month later, the family moved into a new apartment, and a few weeks later, looking at photos of the move with her daughters, Tina saw a dark-haired boy of 10 years old in a scout uniform in one of the pictures taken in the living room. "It's him," one of the girls exclaimed in amazement. "Our friend. How did he get here?" Tina was terrified, but, fortunately, no one from the household saw the boy anymore. The father of 5-year-old Joseph was sitting in the living room when the phone rang. Joseph grabbed the phone, and was silent for a long time, clearly listening attentively to the interlocutor. Finally, the boy hung up the phone and silently went to his room. The father asked who called, but the boy didn't seem to hear him. Finally, after persistent questioning, he almost cried out with tears, "It was Grandpa. He asked me not to tell you, he said it would be a surprise. He's going to meet us by the river tomorrow. Isn't it great?" The next morning Stephen and Joseph were really going fishing. That's just Joseph's grandfather died 7 years earlier. The boy had never seen him. When Heidi turned 3, her family moved to a small village in Georgia. There were no children in the neighborhood. The girl had no one to play with, so her mother was initially delighted to learn that her daughter had met a neighbor, Mr. Gordy, who was happy to play with her. But her joy turned to horror when she learned that Mr. James Gordy, who once lived in the neighborhood, had died 20 years ago. At first, adults thought that Mr. Gordy was just an invention of a little girl who accidentally heard the name of a deceased neighbor. However, when she was presented with several pictures, Heidi confidently identified her adult friend on it, whom she had never seen during his lifetime. The humble ghost did not show itself to anyone else. When Heidi turned 8, he stopped dating her, too. Brenda was the eldest daughter in the family. Her younger sister Shirley was born with Down syndrome and a heart defect and died when she was 2 years old. Soon Brenda's little brother Gerald was born. 2 years later, on the day when Brenda's mother was sorting out the attic and her father was working in the basement, they both suddenly heard a voice that clearly belonged to Shirley. "Dad. Mom." The voice came from the house. Both parents rushed into the room, colliding on the threshold, and saw that Gerald, who was playing in the bedroom, got tangled in a cellophane bag and was already beginning to suffocate. They came running just in time to save the baby. Since then, Brenda says, her father and mother believe that their daughter's spirit saved her brother's life. When my daughter was 3 years old, we had an interesting conversation. That morning she looked kind of disheveled and gloomy. I asked her if she had slept well. She replied, "No. Grandpa Mike pinched my fingers all night and kept me awake. My father, her grandfather Mike, died 8 years before she was born. That's how he used to wake me and my brother when we were little." and at the end of my house there was one old, wooden door that was the entrance to the utility room under the building, probably to the area where sewer pipes usually connect. The door was very ancient in appearance, peeling paint, time-beaten wood and a fragment of a handle, as if specially torn off by local punks. Also, a steel lock was usually hung on this door. I will return to our summer entertainments as a child. There was something like a legend among the local guys. Allegedly a maniac lived in that utility room, who went out at night and looked for kids walking late at night, and that he allegedly ate pigeons with cats. I should note that animals really often disappeared in that area, but most likely not because of some maniac, but for quite material reasons. This legend scared the neighborhood guys so much that they didn't even try to approach that door, especially since its very appearance caused unpleasant sensations. We, the older guys, were skeptical about this. After all, the very idea that a wanted maniac lives under our house, who has not yet been found, sounded very delusional. At some point in time, we had one ticklish thought: to knock on that old door and prove to everyone that there is no maniac. Tom, my classmate friend, decided to do it first. He called the frightened first graders, boldly approached the door and knocked a couple of times, and no one answered him then. The younger kids calmed down more or less, and now they were not afraid of this door as much as before. For several days we took the children to the week, offering them to knock on the old door. Over time, we turned it into a game. At first it was fun, and then the interest faded and we stopped doing this nonsense. 3 days after the last game, 2 children disappeared in our area. Not all of them disappeared at once. First, that he was the first to knock on the damn door, and a day later Craig, also a classmate. Both were leaving their homes and heading to school, but they didn't get to the end. The alleged version is kidnapping. Well, everyone rushed to search, no result. A week or 2 passed, but no one was found. Everyone had already lost hope, when suddenly one day a bad thought came to me. I remembered about the old door to the utility room and offered to search everything there. This, of course, sounded stupid and ridiculous, but there were no other assumptions anymore. In general, Tom and Craig were found, but it was too late. When the police opened the door to the back room, they saw a nightmarish picture. 2 sixth graders were found in a corner of the utility room in an extremely depressing condition. Their bodies were covered with some kind of liquid resembling sulfuric acid, which caused their bodies to almost completely decompose. Strangely, there was no stench in the air, except for the natural smell of sewer pipes. Otherwise, it would be possible to detect them immediately by the stench of corpses, but apparently the criminal hid the bodies well enough. The boys' parents were shocked. For a long time I could not come to my senses after I learned all the details of the tragedy, and often woke up at night in a cold sweat. Long investigations began, but they did not come to any result. Due to the fact that the bodies of the victims decomposed over a long time, it was not possible to find fingerprints, and therefore the killer has not yet been found. Put a like. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new stories.